He's an expert in polling and microtargeting and focus groups, custom data analytics, and has worked for dozens and dozens of campaigns, political party organizations, outside groups in a political world, ranging from local city organizations to national presidential campaigns. He was for example, the deputy analytics officer for Jeb Bush for president in 2016, and we'll try not to bring up too much about that or you'll hurt his feelings. But I like to needle him about it because, of course, we know Jeb Bush is not our president. And he consults with lots of different corporations, and he's a good friend of mine and a former student, so I know him very well. And so without further ado, let's welcome Scott Riding.
Well, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. This class didn't exist when I was a student, and so it makes me very, very happy that it does. I'm curious about the composition of this class. So they tell me it's a lecture. I'm not very good at lecturing, so forgive me. But how many here are political science students versus do we have any international relations students? One, business students, or any other majors that I'm missing? Okay, a couple. The other question I have is kind of how far through the program people are. So in terms of the one program I know is political science, so forgive me those who are not in that program. And I should have asked Professor Monson ahead of time, but is political science 200 still the basic writing and statistics class? Yes, okay. And is political science 328 still the dreaded difficult statistics class? Yes, okay, good. I have a few soapboxes then that I'll probably get on over the course of this. I recognize, I think, and I hope that you recognize, the goal of this course is to get you employed. And so my goal today is to get you employed, okay, first and foremost. What matters to me is that everyone in this room has a sense of job opportunities that you probably haven't thought about before today. Maybe some. Maybe you know Professor Monson enough that he's hinted to you that there are job opportunities out there for the courses that you're in or that you could be in right now. That are beyond law school and beyond just standard political campaigns or beyond going to Congress. Those are easy ones to think about, but there are a lot of opportunities. I graduated in 2009, and my cohort has gone on to all sorts of fields using the skills that we gained here at this institution. And I'm especially kind of excited to speak to you about jobs because I owe my whole career to this institution in a very real way. And I've been told to tell my story. I usually don't indulge that, but they tell me that you're interested in my career path, so I'll tell you about it. But every single step of the way, people, both in terms of skills and in terms of relationships, from Brigham Young University opened doors for me and vouched for me in places that were not available to me just off of my own networks and my own skills. So I want to pay that forward. So I think the first thing I want to tell you is that from an employment standpoint, I'm a resource to you. Every year there's a handful of students that come to me and ask for job advice and ask for connections, and I do as much as I know how to do for those students. And we've been very successful to find opportunities that match skill sets and interests. And so when the time comes that you're thinking about your career and you're not sure what's going to happen, and I hope that you'll think about that earlier than later, I think your final semester is it's more difficult to help you at that point, okay? But come as early as you can. And let's talk about what you're interested in because we're well connected, right? This is a small world in terms of the political side. We're also incredibly connected on the corporate side. Utah is an incredible hub for tech companies. So there's been a lot of networking between me and other business owners between here and Silicon Valley and what's happening in New York, what's happening in some other places, Chicago, around the country. So if you have any interest in any field, really, I'm eager to help you as much as I can. And every year we do a really good job of getting students placed. So please, number one, come talk to me about what you want to do because I'm interested. And that's how I pay back, right? Someone did that for me, and it's meant a lot. The second thing is I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of coming out of this institution. So I'm going to put up a chart here, which is not the best chart, frankly. This is a study that was done a couple years ago, and it shows the gender gap in pay at major institutions across the United States. And this matters to me a lot because down there at the bottom, you'll see among the worst, in fact, among four-year universities, Brigham Young University and Brigham Young University, Idaho, are the worst for gender pay gap, okay? And you may say to yourself, well, a lot of BYU women decide to be stay-at-home moms. They have been excluded from this data set. This is just people working. So men come out of BYU, and the average salary, and I forget how many years after the fact they look at this, but median non-zero income is just under $74,000 a year. For women, it's just under $26,000 a year, which is almost a 200% difference, right? That's shameful to me. That's a problem. This study went on to kind of look at what are the reasons for this. And institutions, conservative religious institutions are among the worst, right? You'll notice Utah Valley University is there. You'll notice that, what was the other one I was looking at? Snow College is there, and then some other religious institutions. There's some cultural reasons for this. There's some expectations reasons for this. But here's the practical advice I have for you. I've been in a hiring position in a number of organizations now, and I've seen a pattern, one that I want to push against. If you're a young woman and you're applying to a job and you get a job offer, I want you to negotiate, okay? I want you to push back. I want you to think about, I want you to do some research and find out what other people are making. My experience has been that when I give job offers to young women or young men, sometimes young men don't negotiate either, but I'm trying to think if I've ever had a young woman negotiate with me. And you should, okay? What happens is that your initial salary coming out of school is the salary that sets you up for the rest of your career. Most of your pay increases after that will be percentage-based. And if you remember much about your Political Science 200 class, percentage increases matter about what the base is. That first base salary will predict the rest of your income for the rest of your life, right? And for example, during the recession, people were starting at a lower spot. And the people who graduated with me in 2009 and 2010 they'll never catch up. It's a loss of millions of dollars over the course of your career. And this represents millions of dollars over the course of your career, okay? So that's soapbox number 2, okay? That's one thing that matters to me. The other thing is that a lot of you are thinking about law school. And I'm not against law school and conceptually. If you want to be a lawyer, law school is the right place to go. If law school is a backup plan for you because you're not really sure and you want to kind of delay that decision and someone has convinced you that a JD is a flexible degree, you're making a huge mistake, okay? This is from a study that was done back in 2013. This is the Wall Street Journal. She's citing the Wall Street Journal here that found that 55% of the 2011 law school class grads, 9 months after the fact, were still not employed. And that has been the experience of my cohort. My friends, we all graduated in 2009. Those who went on to law school, when they got out, there were just no legal jobs, right? It's a combination of the fact that the baby boomers are retiring at a later age, and so you're not losing lawyers at the top to open up jobs at the bottom. And also, entry-level legal jobs are now done by robots, okay? It used to be that entry-level law jobs, entry-level lawyers doing a lot of lookups, dictionary searches, right? Looking through old case books. Most of that work is done by machine learning. So there are fewer entry-level law jobs. There are fewer lawyers leaving. There's a glutton of legal trained professionals on the market, and they're not being hired. And yet the price for law school has not gone down. Okay, so I have friends who are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt who are looking for entry-level work. You don't want that, okay? I also have friends who are very dedicated lawyers and have made it work. But if it's a fallback, I caution you to reconsider, okay? I want you to get employed. And if you're going through the political science department of this institution, and graduate school isn't a sure thing, you may or may not realize that you have all the skills you need to get employed right when you graduate, okay? The political science department here requires a set of quantitative skills that are highly sought after in a lot of different fields. I'm going to talk to you mostly about the political field because that's what I know, but I'll reference some other fields because that's where a lot of my friends are, okay? Let me talk to you about this. This is Kevin Collins. Kevin is a Democratic operative. He probably wants to be known as a Democratic academic, but he works at a think tank that helps Democrats get elected, and so I call him an operative. It's been retweeted by Alex Lundry, who's a Republican operative, and later it was retweeted by Reince Priebus, who at the time was the chair of the Republican Party, later chief of staff in the White House. He points out the fact that political science talking to political science professors, teach your undergrads to use statistical software. It makes them much more employable. And this captures, in tweet form, my lesson today, okay? That class, and between 200 and 328, was the most valuable thing that this institution taught me besides basic critical thinking, okay? In terms of employable skills, 328 is a class where if you get it and you're able to execute on those skills outside of the classroom, there's a lot of companies and organizations that want you. So a question for you, how many people have taken 328? How many are waiting because someone told them to wait? Okay. So my push is that that's wrong, okay? I remember I went to the career counseling in this at the school, and I remember the career counselor there told me, hold off. Take that class at the very end, because most of the students going through here are going to law school, and that class will hurt your chances for law school because it's very difficult. Luckily for me, I got a different set of advice from somebody else, and that turned out to be determinative for my entire career, okay? So what was my career, or is my career, I guess? This is me. This is election night, 2008. You'll recognize a few faces. I don't know the young man in the yellow. I think he worked for BYU TV. But here on the left, some of you may have taken a class from Professor Barber. At the time, he was just Mike, and he was another student with me. He was a graduate student. I was an undergrad. But we did the election night broadcast after the exit poll, 2008. This is my first experience in polling, and it was fun. And I was on TV, and that was crazy, and my wife thought it was awesome, right? This is a few years later, right? This is a less happy time for me. Quinn jokes that, like, let's not bring up Jeb too much, but in kind of minor ways, when Jeb gets brought up, we all get a little bit of anxiety, okay? It's a tough campaign. But this is my campaign staff on Jeb. This is my analytics team, right? We had an internal analytics team. One thing to note is that of this team, only 2 of us were experienced before this campaign. So there's me, and off to the right of Mr. Bush is Tom Wood, who's a professor of political science at Ohio State, who took a leave of absence to come work with us. And then everyone else there are people, undergrads right out of school, who came out of good statistical programs and had all the knowledge we needed to bring them right up to presidential level. So you're getting at least as good training as these young people had when we hired them. That's the other thing. The follow-up is that I'm looking at this list. You know, some of these guys, and I guess I probably shouldn't name them, but some of these guys went on to do finance jobs in New York. And so when we say good money, we mean really good money. Fine. They also have terrible lives, but that's how finance goes. And the others have very good, lucrative, good life careers in D.C., making good salaries, right? And they're all less than 4 years out of school. And it's the statistics, right? That's what gave them an opportunity to do this stuff. This is me with Representative Love. This is election night, 2016, a little bit happier time. And then this is a recent campaign that maybe you guys recognize your congressman here, right? And so I've taken a set of statistical skills that were provided to me at this institution. I've just translated them into the campaign environment. And there's a lot of places where that's correct. There's a lot of places where the statistical mindset and the statistical tools that are taught here allows political campaigns to be more efficient and more effective. Those same tools allow organizations to be more efficient and more effective, both nonprofits and for-profits. And so if I can help you to understand one thing, it's that don't devalue those classes and don't blow them off. Besides basic good critical thinking, which is essential, the most important thing I took away from BYU is those statistical skills. It's provided all of my income. So what sort of things do we do with these? Oh, and then this is all sorts of organizations that have hired us to use these same skills. And I took, by the way, I didn't go to graduate school. I've done no additional academic work. This is all undergraduate stuff that I learned here. I think I took one graduate level course here in stats from Jay Goodliff, one of the public policy courses. Doesn't exist anymore.
We have advanced undergrad classes that we've
It's the same one, right? Okay. So I guess I would push you to take all the statistics classes you can, if you're at all inclined. I know not everyone can be a stats head, but most people can. I think there's a culture of people like to pretend. It's not okay to be illiterate, but it's okay to be innumerate. I think that's a big mistake, right? I think everyone should be numerate, especially in a time, I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it, numerate. Especially in a time when statistics are determinative of public policy, right? Statistics and data we turn to overcome the biases of our human brains, right? Our brains have systematic biases, and one of the only ways to overcome them is using data. And so we've relied on it as a society, and as a result, there are both good and bad actors using data for good, using data for bad, representing it correctly, representing it incorrectly. And the only way to be civically minded and to be able to carve through that is to have some background. So that when you read a stat, a common stat, this comes from Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics, but if you read a stat that says that every year the number of kids killed by guns doubles, that you can stop and think about it and go, that's impossible, right? Which it is, because after the course of 20 years, it'd be trillions of kids, right? It's just not how this works. So you need to be numerate at the very least. And what I'm pushing you to say is, in this institution, you have the opportunity to become skilled, right? It's also unique. Not every political science department cares about this stuff. In fact, I don't know the stats, but when I was a student, most of them were not quantitative. I guess we can name names. The University of Utah, for example, has a very small quantitative component to their program. And I find that the graduates there are less useful to a guy like me. Whereas Ohio State has done very, very well. Georgetown has a very good program. But I think the programs like this one that insist that students walk away with a good sense of how statistics works are rare. And so for some of you, you find that as a burden. As someone who's come through the other side of this, I will say it's a huge blessing and something that you should take advantage of. And I'm not going to claim to be the best student either. I think last time I was here, Quinn was a little bit more candid in his introduction and mentioned the fact that I got B's and B pluses in some of these stats classes. I got engaged that semester and I wasn't fully present, and yet was still able to glean all the things that I needed to be effective in the professional world. So don't think, oh, because I didn't get an A plus in that, I'm not the best at it. There's a lot of skills there that are still useful. If you grokked it, if you figured it out, and you can walk away and open up a piece of statistical software and use it, I tell you, there's people out there looking for you. Okay. Let me walk you through why this has been so valuable, a little bit of a cultural shift in terms of how we think about data and the kinds of data that are available to us. Starting in 2010, the Wall Street Journal started to catalog this idea of a data revolution, a deluge of information that's being collected because of increases in technology, increases in databases, and because of an appetite of big organizations to make decisions based off of harder and harder data. There is now more data being collected about organizations, about individuals than ever before. Okay? This includes the fact that we're all taking pictures of ourselves all the time, that we're videotaping ourselves, but also just data exhaust, data that is collected about us, whether or not we know, because of the devices that we interact with every day. So let me give you a few examples here. For example, there's always been public records. You may or may not know, but when you buy a house, the entire details of that house and the transaction are part of the public record. Every time you vote, the fact that you voted, what time of day you voted, where you voted, is collected. It's part of the public record. Anyone can go look it up, okay? Any sort of lawsuit information. If you're late on your local taxes to the point where you're delinquent, this is all public information, right? That's partly what your credit score is based off of. Public records have been around a long time, but now the public records are easier than ever to access. There are companies that aggregate the information, and I can go and say, I need, Quinn Monson's information, and they will sell it to me. Everything that's public about him, okay? That's partly how background checks work, but it goes well beyond background checks. Loyalty cards, grocery store cards. A lot of grocery stores sell your grocery store history. And for a guy like me and a data analyst, knowing exactly which brand of cereal you buy is not as interesting, but knowing some details about, for example, in this state, in terms of politically, knowing whether or not you buy beer versus not turns out to be pretty important when you're trying to predict someone's politics, as you might imagine. And this is all stuff that is available. So loyalty cards, credit card history, not every credit card, but there are bad actors, I say bad in kind of quotes, that will sell some basic sense of how you use a credit card and some of your history with credit cards. Internet accounts, Facebook has gotten better about this, but back in 2012, Facebook was open for business to political actors. They came to us. I was working for a subcontractor to the Romney campaign, and they came to us and offered Facebook data on the voters in the United States. They said, you should be using this. You should use this for your advertising. Okay? Memberships at gyms, the fact that you're health conscious, department stores, utility accounts, all of these groups are offering data about you to private resellers. One that is new is that the FCC just voted to allow phone companies, cell phone companies, to sell metadata from your cell phone, which previously had been prohibited by regulation. So this is a huge market. And what that market does is it just aggregates these profiles about every adult in the United States. And so, again, as a data analyst, if I need it, if I think that that data is valuable, I can go to these warehouses, give them your name and your address, and buy a huge string of information about your consumer footprint. Okay? That brings up some questions that I am not in a position to answer today. It's a separate lecture. But we live in an opt-out society, where if you don't want this data collected about yourself, you've got to go find these companies and tell them not to. And there's not that many of them. There's maybe 5 or 6 data aggregators. You can go, you can give them your name and say, please leave me out of your database, and they will. Regulation requires them to. But if you don't do that, by default, you're in the database, okay? There are other societies where that's not the case. Many countries in Europe and UK law generally, EU law generally is a lot more strict about this stuff, but the United States opt out, okay? So what kind of stuff do we have? Well, this is a basic voter file. Voter file is public data. You can go to the state and buy a list of every voter, and it includes things like vote history, phone number. In Utah, it used to be age, but they don't actually offer that anymore. But in other states, you can buy someone's birthday or their age, their address, and then if they register for a political party, you can get their registered party, okay? To some people, that alone, and when I say vote history, what I mean is not who you voted for. That is, the secret ballot is a thing, but if you voted or not. Okay? So when you skip an election, people like me can find out. Okay? That's public records. And the reason that data is collected is to have an audit trail so that ostensibly the idea is if the election results are printed and someone says, okay, this many people voted, and then we go to the voter file and we can't figure out who those people who voted were and they don't match up, maybe there was some fraud, right? Fraud is extremely rare, but we have it just in case. But when I go to these data warehouses, instead what I can do is append to that basic voting information tons of information about a person's lifestyle. So for example, some life stage information. Do they have children? Are they married? What education level are they? Occupation. So stuff about their consumer footprint, clothing, car, kind of car they drive, electronics, exercise. You know, like I mentioned, the grocery stuff. Do they drink coffee? Do they drink wine? Are they interested in investments? Some hobby stuff, video games, you know, history buff, photography, boating, gambling, right? A lot of hobby information. And in the end, it's about 1,000 or more consumer data points about every adult in the United States, okay? So I mentioned the ethics of this are complicated. And the honest truth is I've taken myself out of these databases, okay? I'll be real honest with you. And if you come talk to me afterwards, I'll tell you how to do it. But most people haven't. And so for the rest of this, what I want to tell you is about what we do with it, okay? And it'll connect directly back to things that if you've taken 328, you'll see you learned a little bit about. And it's mostly about efficiency. It's mostly about helping a campaign to target people that are actually paying attention and that are actually trying to make a vote decision, and that we can get the right ad to the right people at the right time. So traditionally, this is a pretty new phenomenon, as I mentioned, right? These databases have become really prominent since 2004, and their use in politics, while it started in 2004, 2006, really came to the forefront in 2008 with the election of President Barack Obama, whose campaign was very famous for using these data to target voters, okay? But every campaign does this. Traditionally, before this time, voter targeting was done, well, first of all, everyone does targeting, right? And if you think about it, targeting is predicting things like who's gonna vote, who's gonna be persuaded to support me, who can influence friends and family in how they vote, what messages mobilize my core supporters. Every campaign has to make guesses about the answers to these, but the data tools and the statistical tools, some of which you've learned here, allow campaigns to do that more effectively and more efficiently, okay? So historically, we've used experience, geography, and polling as ways to make these predictions. So for example, every campaign has an old hand who has some information from usually campaigns in the past, right? The old grizzly 50-year-old guy who says, yeah, in 2012, most large donors were investors, so we should spend our time with investors. Or he heard at some point it takes 5 mail pieces to get someone out to vote, because at some point a study was done. I think it was 2002 or something, right? A lot of old hand kind of knowledge. The other way of targeting is using geography, right? So that same, in the state records, they know precinct level information. A precinct is your neighborhood. They can look at the vote totals in a given neighborhood and make guesses to say, well, if I'm going to turn people out to vote, I'm going to pick this neighborhood that voted 69% for Mitt Romney, because that means that hopefully 69% of these people will vote for my Republican candidate who's lower down on the ballot, and that means I'll have an efficiency of 69%. Yes, I'm going to turn out some Democrats, but the ratio will turn out for me in the end, right? And the last thing is polling. So this is what's called a crosstab. You read this in the columns, okay? So you might say, oh, look, this undecided group, that third row, 14% of women are undecided, and especially 23% of women 35 to 54 are undecided. So let's design our entire advertising campaign around women 35 to 54. Okay, it's not that precise, because if you look, there are more non-women than, more people who are not 35 to 54 women who are persuadable, but that's the biggest group, so we're just going to use that as our template of who's persuadable. Okay, these techniques work, but they lack precision, and so I'll walk you through what is the kind of the modern way of determining these things. So instead, what we do is we take the entire registered voter file, we take a subset of them, and we interview them. A pretty big sample. A normal survey will have 500 to 600 people. Instead, we're interviewing 800, 1,000, 2,000, or in a place like Ohio with a large population, 4,000 people. And we're asking them about candidates, ideology, issues, party, etc. So for that group, we know their position on the campaign. We know their position on a set of issues. We know their position on a set of messages. And then we use that as a study universe, and we say, among the data that we have for everyone, consumer footprint, vote history, which of this helps predict their likelihood of sympathizing with my candidate, right? So for example, this is totally hypothetical. Let's say we say people who have children, have a certain education level, shop at a certain grocery store, and have an investment portfolio are 92% likely to be with the Republican, based off the study group. Then we can reasonably infer that people who fit that profile that we did not talk to, also 92% of them are likely to be with us, right? And so you're doing that for a whole bunch of things. So let me give you an example here. Again, hypothetical, it's based off of some profiles from an election from a really long time ago. But let's say I know I've got a woman, she's 21 years old, she's an unaffiliated voter, so she's not registered with either party. Nationally, 22% likely to be voting Republican. So let's learn some more about her. We know that she's graduated from high school, it comes up a little bit. We know that she is a child, it jumps up a lot. We know that she listens to hip hop, that drops it down, right? She's never voted before, that really drops it down. Now she's only 34% likely to vote for the Republican. One thing to keep in mind, none of these data points is the most important, okay? One thing I've learned doing statistical analysis is that people are complex, okay? The human psychology is complex. If you think about a statistical model and you're working on psychological measures, the R squared, the fit of that model, you are happy if you're in the teens, right? You're really happy if you're in the 20s. And when I talk to people in other fields like biology and elsewhere, they're like, oh, an R squared less than 85, I'm not interested, which blows my mind, right? People are complicated. Natural processes are less complicated. So any one data point is not determinative. So let's swap a few out here. Let's say now we know that she's a college graduate, she has an investment portfolio, and she voted in 2010 and 2012. Now suddenly she has a 78% likelihood of being with my candidate. And you can play this game along a whole bunch of dimensions, right? Probability of being persuaded by family values message, probability of voting in a Republican primary, probability of being persuaded by guns rights message, right? All of these things are things we can study and look for patterns in someone's consumer footprint and their voting footprint to try and make reasonable assumptions about efficiency in talking to them and advertising to them, okay? And then Nickerson and Rogers had this awesome paper talking about why campaigns do this, because it's an efficiency question, right? So if you make a prediction about who's likely to be persuadable, and that prediction's accurate, and you take the top 20% of people who are likely to be persuadable, and then you advertise to them alone, suddenly the efficiency power of every dollar that you spend as a campaign is 200%. Every dollar is now worth $2 because of this efficiency analysis. And so campaigns that have a sufficient budget, which are most, frankly, most campaigns of any budget, some efficiency work goes a long way. And I'll tell you, candidates love it when you can help them to spend less money to talk to more people. The other thing that happens is over time, so 2004, this was just getting started. 2012, now pretty much every political campaign and political organization has some sort of access to these kinds of predictions, okay? Whether or not they're sharing the same predictions is not often the case, but the techniques are similar. And so what you're looking at here is on the y-axis is likelihood to turn out, on the x-axis is partisanship. And then the color, the more green it is, means the more messages, the more mail pieces a certain voter got, mail or TV or radio. And then red means they're not getting very many. And this is among Democratic groups. And all Nickerson and Rogers are trying to show us is that as predictions have gotten more precise, coordination has gotten better, where Republicans are not getting much information from Democratic outside groups, and Democrats are getting a ton of information. And so now all these actors trying to influence a campaign are all being way more efficient. And so in 2004, if you're a Democratic voter, you may have gotten 4 mail pieces. In 2012, you're probably getting 30 from 6 different groups because they've all targeted you and seen you're a high turnout Democratic voter. We need to talk to you, okay? So this has meant that the whole industry is more efficient. So let me show you how this works at a very practical level. It used to be that the only way to predict someone's likelihood of voting was to ask them. And it turns out that people lie, okay, when you ask them if they're likely to vote. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek. I actually think people are really bad at predicting. They're just bad. They think probably I will, and they think I probably should, and so they think they will, and they end up over-reporting it. The surprising fact is that not only do people over-report it, they also underreport it, okay? So this is in 2008 presidential campaign. There are 1,000 interviews represented here. And each row is this question, are you likely to vote? So people in the top row, definitely gonna vote. Next row, probably gonna vote. 50-50, oh, I'm not gonna vote, and I don't know, okay? The percentage in green are the percentage that voted. The percentage in gray are the percentage that did not vote. So some things may stand out to you. For example, among people who said they definitely were going to vote, 13% didn't. Okay, that's fine. That's the over-reporting. Here's the crazy part. Among people that said, oh, I'm definitely not going to vote, more than half of them did, right? So part of this is persuasive to me to just say, okay, if they're answering a political survey, they're probably going to vote, right? How many people are going to stay on the phone for 15 minutes with a random kid in a call center in Utah to talk about politics and then not show up to the voting booth? But at a basic level, people are just bad at predicting. In fact, this is Rogers again in 2014. 15% of people who say they're going to vote don't. 64% of people that say they aren't going to vote do. Okay? So it makes it really hard to use self-reported vote intention as a good filter for whether or not someone's likely to vote. So instead, we use historical measures. It turns out that the best predictor of your likelihood to vote is whether or not you have voted in an election like this before. If you voted in the past, you're likely to vote in the future. And there's some movement around the margins, right? There are groups that get activated. There are waves that happen. They do happen. It seems like we're in one. But generally speaking, if you're the kind of person that votes, then you're likely to vote. And so what we can do is take that voter file that has every individual in a state, that has a record of when they voted, and we can look and make projections about their likelihood to vote in the future. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say I've got a man who's 52 years old, he's unaffiliated, he registered to vote 33 years ago, which is a stability measure, so he's been around a while. He's voted in 4 of 4 of the last federal general elections, never voted in a federal primary, he's not a strong partisan, primary elections are not his gig. He's voted in 3 out of the 4 last municipal general elections, likes to vote for mayor and city council, he's never voted in a municipal primary, and he receives a vote by mail ballot. This is back in 2016. We built a model that projects a man like this is going to have an 86% probability of voting in a presidential election. And you can do that math for every single voter on the file. And it gives you a nice map of likely electorate. And if you're a campaign, then you just sort on likelihood to vote, and you start at the top and you go down until you run out of money. It just helps you be a lot more efficient. You maybe ask yourself, well, if you never talk to people that don't vote, then they're never going to vote. It's a perpetuating cycle. And the answer is that's a question for the political scientists and the civics, people who do civics work. But for a political campaign working on limited resources, we're not here to build an ideal world. We're here to win, right? And people who vote, vote. People who don't vote, don't. And it costs a lot of money to get someone who doesn't vote to vote. And so most of the time we focus on those who do. So the lesson to you is if you want to be involved civically, if you want to be a part of the community and you don't vote, I'm going to ignore you. Okay? And if you call the campaign office, we'll know that you vote or you don't vote, right? Every campaign has this information. Voter file information is public stuff. So if you want to have a voice, not just in terms of the electoral math of who wins, if you want to have a voice and you want campaigns that take you seriously, be a voter, okay? Because that's all we care about. We also care about finding activists. So voting is one thing that we try and predict. We also try and predict, what do people care about? And there are components to this, right? So when I try to find activists, usually it's because I have a cause, an issue cause, and I want people to call Congress, or I want them to call the legislature. That's a big ask, right? That's a big thing to ask someone to do. I want you to call Congressman Curtis, and I want you to tell him to vote no on X, Y, or Z. People often don't call their congressman. And if you've never called your congressman, it can be a very intimidating process. And so what we want is the perfect combination of people who have had political experience, but who also care about this issue, right? And those are both things that we can predict. Those are both things that we can find patterns that help us. Who are the most likely people to both call Congress and also to care about our issue? So there's a few things, right? People who have done it before are helpful. Any sort of past public participation is predictive of likelihood to participate. And then this mindset, you're not going to call Congress unless you believe that you're influential, that people look to you for political direction, or that calling Congress means something, kind of an efficacy measure, or that this is important, right? That this issue matters enough that you think Congress should act. And so we're looking for people who kind of fit those three profiles, and where that Venn diagram meets is a list of people with names and addresses and phone numbers that we can get volunteers or paid people to call and convince them to call Congress, right? And so often we'll be hired, we want you to get 800 direct contacts to this political office to tell their congressman to vote no on this issue. And my job is to find those 800 people, and this is the math we're doing. So I want to give you a campaign case study, campaigns that are data-driven, and give you a little insight into how campaigns think. We have permission. I have permission to share this. This is from Representative Love's 2016 campaign. We were part.
Take some questions at this point, just because of how much time is left.
Oh, really? Where are we at?
We're about 10 minutes before we're done.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Just, I don't know.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. He knows that I like to talk about this campaign. Why don't we take a pause there for a moment and see if there are questions up to now. Any questions at all? I know earlier I fobbed off the ethics questions, but feel free to ask it because I'm happy to talk about it. Go ahead.
How did you find connections in your field?
Great question. I failed to tell the story.
You should repeat it because they're recording it, they may not hear it, the question.
Oh, okay. So the question was, how did I get connections into the industry? When I was here, I took Political Science 328 and a few other 300-level courses. And then I was in a class of Professor Monson's, and he offered me to join the Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy as an RA. I took that job at a huge pay cut. I was working for a pretty lucrative dead-end job. I took that job and learned to do some basic political research, and it meant that as I was graduating, I was offered academic jobs, okay? So I had a job offer in hand from Vanderbilt University to come work on some Latin American research, which marginally interested me, but in hindsight would have been a terrible move. And I was about to take that job. I was getting to the end of the things. I had a wife, I had bills to pay, and I was about to take that job when Professor Monson approached me and said, "This is a mistake. You shouldn't take that job. You and I both know that you're not going to be happy there." And I had finally convinced Quinn that a PhD also was not in my future. So once we were both on the same page, he wrote some very nice emails to people in Washington that he'd gotten to know through his dissertation process, especially a man named Alex Gage, who is a storied pollster out of Michigan and then later Washington, D.C. He was one of Gerald Ford's pollsters. And he wrote an email recommending me and sending my resume. Alex read it, and now in hindsight I know I was hired the second he got that email. Okay, at the time though, I was contacted by Alex. They flew me out, and I had an interview with them, and it was my dream job. In fact, there were 4 companies, I believe, who responded to Quinn's inquiry, all of which offered to interview me. I really only interviewed at that one because it was a place I really, really wanted to work. And because of the work that Professor Monson done, and the relationship he already had, the door was wide open for me when I arrived, and everything kind of flowed out of that. I spent 5 years there. I did a lot of work with a lot of different groups. After that, came here to start my company. So for me, having a relationship with professors who had relationships in the industry went a long way, so I recommend it. What other questions? By the way, I can be, that's one of the reasons I feel so strongly about using my connections to help you. Because, I didn't earn my first job. Some of it came to me because Quinn had a good relationship with people that trusted him. Go ahead.
So apart from 328 and other statistical analysis classes that you can take, what other hard skills should I like to develop as after my education?
Yeah. I assume that anyone with a bachelor's degree can write. So taking writing courses is good and important. Mostly you're going to prove to me that you can write because of the emails you write me and your resume. So I wouldn't go too far out of what you've already got for writing. The statistical skills are important. And then the other thing I've seen students in this institution do very smartly, I don't even know if that word, wisely, is take computer science courses. If you have any technical inclination at all, pretty much everyone has to use the computer tool for their job, right? And the better you are at making that computer do things for you, the more efficient you're going to be in your job. So I often have interns and in our company take basic like scripting programming classes, not like legitimate build software, but just how do I use Python to make the computer do boring things for me? So for example, if I have a folder of pictures and I need to rename all of them, I can either sit there for 4 hours and click on it, or I can sit there for 20 minutes and write a little script that does it for me. It turns out being the guy that can write that little script goes a really far way in every single job environment there is. All of them. Ask the journalists, ask the comms guys, everyone. The guy who knows how to write or the girl who knows how to write a little script that does something for you goes a long way. So that's the other hard skill to think about in terms of generalizability. You had a question, I think. Yeah, so I was trained here in Stata, which, whether or not that's a programming language, I guess we can argue, but to get to the past the semantics in terms of statistical skills, I learned Stata and I had some exposure to SAS and SPSS. When I first started in the industry, SPSS was the standard. Turns out it's also the easiest one to use, which is nice, but it's a terrible piece of software. And so my company operates on R, and I've learned that most companies like mine are either moving to R or have already moved to R. The nice thing about R is it costs nothing, right? It's free. It was designed by an Australian. The Australians are very proud of that fact, and it's really, really solid statistical software. So I'd recommend that to you. So I know 328 is offered in both Stata and R. Is that still true?
Sometimes, depending on who teaches it.
Yeah, I would do the R one in a heartbeat.
Is there a scripting thing that you would recommend?
Yeah, but the other, in terms of data science, the two data science languages are R and Python. And Python is more generalizable in terms of non-data science skills, but it's also a big tool in the data science world. So data inclination, having those two things on your resume looks good to me. The other thing is don't claim things on your resume that you're not really solid about. The first thing I'll do with you is we'll have an informational interview and talk about what your goals are. But if you want to work for me, the second thing you're subject to is a brief technical challenge. And I say brief, okay, it really is, because I'll know in the first 10 minutes whether or not you were being too sparkly in your resume about how much you know the software of your choice. And it's not that I'm not going to require you to do R in front of me unless you claim R, but if you say you're an Excel expert, I want to see some Excel expertise. If you claim you're an SPSS expert, I want to see SPSS. If you claim you're just familiar with something, that's fine. Set expectations. The truth is, if you're just familiar with R and you show me that familiarity, you're still above a whole bunch of applicants to my company, okay? So just keep that in mind. When it comes to technical skills, you're going to be tested on them, so brush up before the interview. Not at all. I learned C++ when I took computer science classes, and it's an important tool to become a seasoned software engineer, and I don't need seasoned software engineers, right? Yeah, the nice thing about the languages for statistics is that they've abstracted away most of what C++ pushes you into, like memory management, and it's just not, it is not productive enough for the pace at which we work. Any other questions? Go ahead.
How many people do you work with or do you hire that just have a bachelor's and don't have a master's?
Do we have any masters on staff besides you? And we have 2 PhDs on staff, but not full-time. And then the rest of us are bachelors. No, Nick. Nick has a master's degree. An MPA.
But he doesn't do stats work.
No, he's our operations VP. Yeah, I mostly hire undergrads who have either worked for me in the past, so I train them and I know I train them, or they've come out of this institution and other institutions that I trust. I'm sure our company's only 3 years old. I'm sure that as our company grows and matures, we'll have to hire mid-level people to expand quickly. But as it is now, our model has been hire entry-level people who've got all the right raw material, and we give them the training to make it work. Go ahead.
So it sounds like you're hiring political science people often with computer science experiment. Do you ever do the inverse? Do you have a computer science majors with political experience that you hire?
Yeah, that combo is very rare, it turns out. The other thing is it's hard for us to be competitive. If you're a computer science guy and you want to build software, the market for software engineers is very, very tight. And so the entry-level salary for a software engineer is just higher than we can offer. So I usually don't have the option to hire those people. I've hired database engineers at times, which is kind of a separate set of skills. But if you know how to build a piece of software, there are bigger companies with fatter wallets, and I would recommend you to them. Unless you're, if you got a real political bent, then let's talk. But usually the money talks louder. Yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead.
So you've given one example of Jeb, and then there's the other big example of Hillary. Does all the statistical gathering and analysis, does it always result in a positive outcome, or sometimes gathering statistics is not necessarily predictable to the actual thing that's going to happen in the real world?
Yeah.
So
No.
I'm just wondering, you've got so much data. Is there a case where you've got so much data that you've got too much data and maybe it's not going to predict the outcomes significantly?
Yeah, sure.
That's a big part. You don't have to.
No, that's okay. The question is sometimes is there too much, so much data that we're.
How many times does it not work that the outcome
Yeah.
is not predicted and it's completely different than what you predicted?
Right. So how often does this all fail is the question. And the answer is regularly enough, right? Every single one of these models, I love, the biologists who like to say all models are wrong, some models are useful, right? Same idea. We're modeling human behavior, and so individual level kind of predictions can be wrong and are often wrong, but aggregate predictions can be right unless you've missed an underlying factor. So 2016 is one of those times, right? The other thing is, I think, the hard thing about being the quantitative guy in the campaign is being painfully aware of how little of an effect what you're doing can actually have, right? We're marginal players. It's our goal to move the dial a bit because 90% of this is determined by party ID, right? People's group affiliation with a certain party is much more powerful than any persuasive message we could give them. And so that said, because most elections in which I'm hired, that partisanship gap is very narrow, then those marginal things matter, and that's where we play. But I don't always win, and I hate, I'm in politics because I like to win. In fact, I have to win. We can talk about that some other time. I think there's a quote from Moneyball where Billy Beane says, "I hate to lose even more than I like to win." That's me, okay? And 2016 was a very hard year for me. In those primaries. And some of that was we had a very good data team. And what did we find? August, September, October, November, December. By December, we were totally depressed. And we didn't drop out till February. And so it cuts both ways. Sometimes the data is excellent. We're learning what we need to do next. And sometimes it's telling you, you're doomed, right? And sometimes those decisions go all the way up to the top and people make rational decisions about what to do next and sometimes not. Sure.
The people that you give this data to, do they ever, I know this is an ethics discussion, but it feels to me that you get better and better at targeting. You're getting better at everybody staying in their echo chamber.
Yeah.
And you're giving everybody what they want to hear because it totally matches it. It feels like I want some superhero to come in and say, no, I want you guys to hear the other stuff and make
Right.
a difference. Or how do you just sell it because somebody wants it, or do you try to see them?
No, that's a great question. So the question is, if we're doing such good targeting, isn't it true then the Democrats talk to Democrats, Republicans talk to Republicans, both talk to the narrow sliver of persuadables, but really don't get a lot of cross-pollination? I think probably you're right, right?
So really, that's making us even more polarized, even though it's helpful that you can do this. It's helping us
Yeah.
more polarized.
And like the one, and pretty much every efficiency technology we have is doing that, right? We all choose who we follow on Twitter. Our Facebook algorithm identifies the things that we care about and starts to filter out things we don't care about. Our Instagram photos are just of the things we find pretty, right? And that is the case, and it's not something we've grappled with as a country. I will say there is still a context for being exposed to cross-cutting ideas and evaluating them by their merits, and that is the university setting, and it's unique, and you're in it, and you're not going to get it again, so take advantage of it. The rest of the world is pretty echo chambery.
How does the automation of job tasks affect like career opportunities in data science?
Yeah, so the question is, how does automation of job tasks affect data science? And the answer is that data science is a funny term. It's mostly marketing, okay? Statisticians get annoyed with it. I don't blame them. But this idea of data science of, okay, let's put a place for data at the table in decision making, is getting more and more automated every year. So right now is a special time. You can get away with being a data scientist as an undergraduate, partially because there are not enough of us, right? There are not enough people who know how to do any of this. But I imagine in a generation it's going to require a lot higher degree because the entry-level stuff will be handled by the algorithms, but we're just getting started. So I wouldn't worry too much now, but the truth is if you want to future-proof and data science is your outcome, go to graduate school. I will warn you that these Masters of Data Science programs coming out of business schools, I have interviewed a lot of students coming out of those, and I find that they are woefully unprepared. I think that a lot of business schools have seen a business opportunity and are selling a master's degree because there's a market for it and are not actually delivering on the skills. If you're serious about data work, then I would say get either a master's in statistics or a PhD in something technical and avoid these Masters of Data Science programs in the short term. Anything else? Am I out of time? I don't get to brag about Mia? Okay, some other time. It's been very nice to have you guys. I'm serious. Let me just reiterate. I'm serious about getting you employed. Please come talk to me. I have cards today. I don't know how many, hopefully enough. If not, I will give Professor Monson a bunch so that when it occurs to you to think about it, reach out to me, email me. I would love to talk. I would love to connect you to where you want to go. Even if that's one thing I failed to mention, I got a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle. We're all very friendly. So if you're not a Republican, that's fine. I know the Democrats. In fact, a buddy of mine is one of the top Democratic consultants, and he first got his job at the DCCC because of a relationship he established with me through some dinner talks we had. So very, very happy and eager to get you where you want to go, okay? Matters to me. Thank you.